So up until now, we've sort of been talking about the labor market and how businesses or firms, sort of decide how many labor hours they want to purchase at a given wage rate. Okay, so at $15 an hour, how many hours do we want to employ people for? Okay, but another question that's worth considering is how many employees does the firm want to hire to work that number of labor hours, right? So suppose a firm requires, 400 hours per week. Okay, so the firm requires 400 hours per week. Should they hire, 10 people at 40 hours? Or what about 20 at 20 hours? Right? Which one should they do? Should they do 10 workers or should they do 20 workers? Right? Or maybe they could hire 5 workers at 80 hours. Right? Which one should they pick? Okay? And so the answer to this question depends on a lot of different factors. Okay? So one important one important consideration is what we call the cost of overtime. Okay? And so in the U.S., the Fair Labor Standards Act requires that all hourly non-supervised workers get paid time and a half for all hours over 40 worked per week. And so what we should expect is that firms would want to avoid hiring workers for more than 40 hours per week, as the workers immediately become 50% more expensive after the 40th hour. Okay? But at the same time, we do see some firms regularly scheduling their workers for overtime. And so what can we conclude from that? Well, we can conclude that the cost of finding an additional worker, which would reduce the number of hours each worker had to work, must be greater than the cost of simply paying workers overtime pay, right? So let's say that we have, this scenario, and let's do this. We'll say, we need 41 hours of work per week. Right, we'll do a simpler example, okay? And the wage equals $20, okay? So if there's no overtime regulation, we can hire one worker times 41 hours times $20 per hour, and this is hour, right? And that'll give us $820. Right? And that'll be our total wage bill. But now, if it's time and a half, well, now we get one worker times 40 hours times 20 hours, or $20 per hour, plus 1 hour times time and a half, right, which would be 1.5 times 20 per hour, equal to, so let's see, this is 800. 1.5 times 20 is 30, so plus 30, all right, equals $830, right? And so with overtime, this one worker working 41 hours now costs $830 instead of $820. And so if we can find someone who's willing to work 1 hour, or maybe split this up into 2 jobs that are, let's say, 20 hours a week and 21 hours per week, then we can save $10, okay? But if we see this business doing this, right, just paying $830 per week, what we can conclude is that it must cost more than $10 to find another worker who would be willing to come in and decrease the number of hours of work that this one person does. Okay, so what we're saying here is that this difference, this $10 between these two here, right? If the cost of finding another worker is greater than the $10, then the business is just going to pay the extra $10. Okay. Now another one would be regulation for benefits for full-time workers. So regulated benefits for full-time work. Okay, so the quintessential example here, at least in our time, is actually the Affordable Care Act. Okay, the Affordable Care Act basically says that employers must provide health insurance for full-time employees, with a full-time employee being defined as someone who works 40 hours per week, or I think it's actually down to 35, I can't remember, but let's pretend it's 40, okay? So 40 hours is classified as full-time, and let's say that health insurance costs $1,000 per employee. Okay, and let's go back to that person working 40 hours per week. So if someone works 40 hours and they make, let's say 10, I want to keep the math simple, $10 per hour, right? Normally, we would say the wage bill is $400, right? $400, that's the wage bill, done, right? And for 39 hours at $10 per hour, the wage bill will be $390, right? And so, but that 1 hour, that one extra 40th hour, okay, so this is where there's no ACA, right? So no ACA, 40 hours costs $400. But with the ACA, the first 39 hours cost $10 per hour, and the last hour, the 40th hour, so plus 1, right, is going to cost $10 plus that $1,000, right? And so now the total wage bill for one worker working 40 hours per week is actually $1,400, right? And so here, right, it makes no sense. We should expect to see businesses say, you know, hey, we're going to avoid hiring a worker for that 40th hour because that 40th hour means I've got to pay this $1,000, right? If they don't work that 40th hour, I don't have to, okay? And so the 40th hour, the 1 hour, the one extra hour that gets you to full time is the one that costs that much, right? That is the marginal hour, okay? And so here, it's no surprise that part-time work is easier to find today than full-time. The full-time employee costs significantly more. Now, these numbers are obviously made up, right? I haven't looked at the real numbers for the Affordable Care Act in, gosh, probably 3 years now, okay? So these are inaccurate or inaccurate numbers, but the concept is true, right? It's no mystery why lots of people who earn somewhere around $10 to $15 per hour tend to have 2 or even 3 part-time jobs instead of 1 full-time job, okay?